Hi, Sam. I see your hand up. Do you want to say something?
All I was going to suggest is why not, while we are waiting, just quick round of introductions.
Sure. That would be fine. I'm Claire Card. I'm a professor at the University of Saskatchewan, a longtime advocate for lots of stuff here in town. So welcome, everybody. I'm very pleased to be here tonight with some of our friends and colleagues. I think we'll just move over to Jenny. Would you like to just say a few words, Jenny? You're muted, Jenny. We're just going to open up your mic here.
Oh, great. Thank you. Yeah, the host just unmuted me. Thank you for that. Yeah, my name is Jenny Kwan. I'm the Member of Parliament for Vancouver East. And so I'm zooming in today from the unceded Coast Salish territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh peoples.
Thank you. Mikayla?
Yeah, I'm Mikayla Schultz. I've only just returned to advocacy after a short hiatus. I advocated within the transgender community for about a decade. And, my husband and I recently were faced with homelessness, which kind of kicked me in the butt to see what was going on and kind of hopefully do something about it. And I landed here. So.
That's good. Reverend Lorraine Trout, would you like to say a few words?
Yeah, I came to see what this is all about. I'm a retired minister from the Center for Spiritual Living in Saskatoon. And yeah, that's about it. I'm just here to be curious.
Thank you. Patrick?
Yeah, thanks, Claire. My name is Patrick. Well, I'm just here to hear different thoughts and ideas. I've lived in Saskatoon, Westview for a few years, and now I'm in the the federal riding of Saskatoon. Well, you know, yeah, Kevin was riding, right? You know, so it's yeah, it's not good, but you know, I'm just here for listening to different ideas and how we can do things differently on a federal level. Of course, I don't think we're ever gonna get this back to the NDP, but yeah, no, it's good to see you guys. Thanks for having me.
Good. Joe and Carol?
Well, we're just very concerned citizens. Excuse me. I think it's unbelievable that we have as many homeless people as we do, particularly in our climate. And I think that shelters are fine, but that's not the answer. We need to look at housing for needy people.
Absolutely. Jacob?
Yeah, Jacob Gazella, Saskatoon Grasswood. I am the president of our federal EDA currently.
Barb?
Oh, I live in Saskatoon University and I'm active on the executive of our riding. And I too am very concerned about the numbers of people we're seeing even in Saskatoon that don't have a place to live or are living in terrible situations. And I have a brother who's disabled and very poor, and I have concerns about, a lot of concerns about disability and how disabled people are forced to live.
Absolutely. Kathy?
Hi, everybody. I'm Kathy Sproul, and I'm on the executive of the Saskatoon University EDA, and also part of a committee that we have recently formed with 4 ridings, the 3 Saskatoon urban ridings and Carlton Trail, Eagle Creek, to try and put together events like this one. And just want to say thanks to Claire for getting this one up and running.
Myrna?
Unmuted there. Hi, I live in Saskatoon University as well, and I am the president of the new chief, Mr. Wass's provincial NDP, and I would like you to go to the chat and see the invite to Willow Grove, and Chief Mr. Wass's are having an event on the 2nd of April. So I'll just turn it over to the next person.
Pat?
Are you speaking
Pat
to
Funk?
Pat? I
I can hear you.
hear you. Your volume is very poor.
Okay, is that better?
Yeah, when you did that, you leant forward, that got better.
Okay. Do you want to say a few words, Pat?
Yes, well, I'm continuing to be concerned about how we're dealing with the big issue of homelessness. So I'm pleased to see the NDP picking this up in the way they are with this event. So I'm just checking in on what you're up to, what mischief you might be up to, and I can cheer you on with that.
Thank you. Margaret Corbett?
There, now you can hear me.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, Margie Corbett, I'm a retired high school English teacher. I live in Newtana, and I'm very concerned about the degree of homelessness in our fair city, and that's why I'm here.
Okay, thank you, Margaret. Paul Benson?
Well, I just want to say hi. It's a new event, a new experience, but homelessness is really an unfortunate, terrible thing across our country, and wonderful to share some ideas about it.
Jennifer Bowes? Jen, you're not unmuted yet.
Sorry, I thought I pressed it, did not. Jennifer Bowes, I'm our MLA for Saskatoon University provincial riding. So really interested in this event. It's a serious issue, getting more and more serious in our province. And I wanted to be here on behalf of our caucus. I am not our housing critic, but I am our critic for human rights. And I think there's a lot of overlap. I think housing is a human right. Also our critic for status of women and advanced education. So I'm here to learn and here to listen to people from the community. Thanks.
Okay. Well, we're heading up to 7:15 here, so I'd love to have everyone else introduce themselves. If we get stuck, we'll continue a little bit with that. But our schedule tonight, I'm just going to begin with a land acknowledgement, and then I'd like to briefly introduce our panelists. Then we're going to have the panelists speak for 10 or 15 minutes. And then once all of the panelists have spoken, we'll open it up for questions and comments to the audience. I hope that works for everybody. We do have the recording on, so just so everyone knows what's going on with that. And if that's a problem, please reach out to us. So my land acknowledgement, I wrote this as part of one of our activities with a group of students, and this is my personal acknowledgement. Wakotoan, I am a settler that was born in the land of the Haudenosaunee, the people of the Longhouse. I live and work on Treaty 6 territory, and I strive for truth and justice to remedy the harms of our colonial past. I seek to walk the path of reconciliation together with people of this sacred land, including the Dene, Dakota, Lakota, Cree, and Métis people. I honor their ancestors in the living sky and the knowledge keepers who teach me with their stories about this beautiful land, clear water, restless wind, resilient people, and all creatures who share this place. So thank you, everybody. I think we will go ahead and probably have Mikayla Schultz speak first. Mikayla has been often on the news. She is a very active community advocate and has organized many of the community walks that we've had here in Saskatoon. to help with our housing insecure people and to bring attention to the issues that we have within Saskatoon. It's true, we have a ghastly climate, and I found last week when I was trying to get some cash on a Saturday morning that the downtown ATMs were all locked up, presumably in a way to just make sure people couldn't get in there to even warm up for a second. So it's just the type of corrosive practices we have here in the city that aren't friendly to anybody. I met Mikayla through the advocacy groups that are here in town, and she said to me that we should be taking a solutions-oriented approach. And she has personal experience with housing insecurity, and tonight she's going to talk to us a little bit about her thoughts. So over to you, Mikayla. Unmute, Mikayla. There you go.
There you go. Thank you for allowing me to speak. I always come to these things unprepared because I feel it's better to just speak to my knowledge. As I mentioned earlier, my husband and I, we faced the prospect of homelessness recently last October. For the last year and a half, we've been very concerned with the food insecurity, which is another topic in and of itself, but I think it's very important to the homeless discussion. We had been attending to different organizations within Saskatoon, the food bank, the Friendship Inn, the different soup kitchens and stuff, just to make ends meet for the month. We found that benefits that we were receiving on social assistance, specifically the SED program, just weren't going far enough to cover our expenses. And when we were faced by eviction last October, admittedly, our world's kind of crashed down a little bit and in a hurry, because we don't know a lot of people in this city, and there aren't a lot of couches that I know I can surf on. So I took it upon myself last October to start an effort to bring awareness to the homelessness that exists in Saskatoon, and started with a weekly walk from the Friendship Inn on 20th Street down to City Hall, just to bring awareness to the issue. Of course, you heard that there was a fellow who passed away early in the winter due to exposure, being forced to live outside. I don't know what solutions to offer, what solution we'll come up with in this meeting. I know homelessness has a long history. I was just Googling it, and the term homeless was coined in America in 1870, just after the Civil War, to describe former Civil War soldiers who had to wander the country looking for work, for food, for housing, and whatnot. And it's surprising that in 150 years we haven't found a solution to this problem. From some people's perspective, other people choose to live homeless. Like I said, I don't know what solutions there are. I'm surprised we haven't solved it yet. We did a letter writing campaign for an initiative that was before City Council here in Saskatoon a couple months ago. And I called out a lot of suggestions from those letters that were written to City Council with recommendations on what we can do to support people who are unhoused. We give a lot of support right now, but there seems to be a lot of barriers to accessing some of those supports. I'm just going to read through some of the recommendations I wanted to highlight here. One is providing 24-hour emergency warm-up facilities, which there has been some introduced here in Saskatoon, finally in like December or something like that, January even. Of course, another suggestion everyone's heard is housing first programs, right? Everyone knows what that, I think everyone knows what that is. It's just get people into houses, regardless of what rules and regulations they can't meet, without barrier. Another suggestion was to provide outdoor sources of heat. One person suggested back in the early 20th century, we had for homeless people, we had burning barrels. All during the winter, people can stand around a burning barrel and warm up. I think something similar to that could be an easy solution, just by accessing a natural gas burner, on the side of a sidewalk or something like that. Heated bus shelters, barrier-free washrooms. I think this is something that a lot of people don't think about, is just some of the things that homeless people have to face, and one of those is access to washrooms. We take it for granted. We have a toilet in our suite. Access to walk-in beds instead of having to be registered and all that stuff. A change to the temperature response, the temperature at which our city opens up the 24-hour warm-up spots and stuff. I believe it's, I don't know, something like -27 or right now or something like that, where hypothermia can occur within 8 hours at +5 degrees Celsius. The idea that people only need to warm up when it's -30 outside is a little ridiculous. Well, one thing I would like to see is designating outdoor spaces for people to set up tents and warming stations and stuff. I mean, tent city, right? I mean, it's a simple approach. Seems to work in other cities to a point. Other people suggested that we need to review and adjust bylaws and policies to put it bluntly, to increase the chances of survival for the homeless population. And these letters came out in the middle of winter, so survival was a pretty high priority at that time, being -30 degrees Celsius. And another one is open up buildings that are sitting empty and allow their uses. We all heard that there's thousands of suites and homes that are sitting empty in Saskatchewan right now, no one occupying them. And that just seems kind of contradictory to our goals. One thing I like to emphasize, I think it's very important that anyone living or anyone working in support of unhoused people is to have direct contact with people who are living in poverty. I see a lot of these projects and programs and everything started and supported by government agencies and business owners and complaints from citizens of the community, but and I'm not familiar with the research or anything like that, but how many of these organizations connect directly with individuals, and I mean that's part of the experience I want to share is getting to know the people that live in the streets, and a lot of them I call my friends. I've met them at the soup kitchens. I hang out with them and talk with them, you know, hours on end, getting to know them, their lives, their reasons for being homeless, their experiences with organizations aren't always positive. Yeah, I think it's important to just connect with unhoused people and get their input, right? I don't know where to go. Like I said, I came a little bit unprepared, but yeah, I don't know. It just seems a top-down approach. Really, we've had some discussion within our organization about how. Now, this isn't a term I came up with. It was one that was provided to me, the homeless industry. And when I hear the term industry, I think of, capitalism, and businesses and trying to make money. The fact that we call it a homeless industry is really sad, in my opinion. You shouldn't be focusing on money-making proposition. We should be focusing on the lives of people who are discarded by our society for whatever reason. They have addictions, they have mental health issues, they're turned away from their families, they're lost their jobs, and once you get to know these people, they're just like any other people. One gentleman I got to know really good, I call him Scrapper John. And, he used to own a business, trucking business in North Battleford. His wife divorced him suddenly and he lost his business, and now he's living in the streets of Saskatoon. So as you can see, I mean, the idea that you need to be addicted or have mental health issues or anything like that to be homeless is kind of misplaced, because take a look at our economy right now. It's hard for everyone. I hear a lot of talk about how the working class is getting poorer and poorer, closer and closer to being homeless themselves, right? That societal gap between the poor and the rich is. So I think, homelessness and all the other issues that go with that isn't just an issue for governments and homeless people themselves, but I think it's an issue for the working class as well. If you take it in a larger context of the economic downturn that we're seeing right now. And it's great that the government will, send out a few $100 every now and then, but once that few $100 is spent on groceries or bills or whatever, how are we supposed to maintain ourselves with the higher prices of everything, gasoline, rent, groceries, all that stuff? Like, I haven't seen our benefits go up at all, even though the rate of inflation or the consumer price index in Canada is increasing almost exponentially, but we don't see any increase in our benefits. I think there needs to be more support for lower income individuals and less barriers to those supports. I don't know what else I have to say. I'm willing to answer questions later.
Thanks, Mikayla. I actually just messaged everybody that you're here to speak to the lived experience and the folks that you know. Myself, I had a mother who suffered from schizophrenia and left the home a couple of times, and was terrified as a child. And I think there's so many complicated layers to this story, but the immediate solutions that we wanted from City Hall were some of the ones you mentioned, like places to warm up, places,
Right.
support the people, even those who choose to be outside. But I think the majority would prefer not to be, and we'd like to build on that.
Right. There's got to be one of the other things I read once, and this might be controversial, but the handing out of warm socks and winter clothing and blankets and stuff, and one place where I read says it kind of enables that whole homelessness thing. Like, we should be doing more than just handing out blankets to people who are at risk of freezing to death. I mean, there's so many things going on around in North America right now in regards to homelessness, like tiny homes. How hard would it be to get home construction companies to use their scrap wood to build tiny homes to put in parks for homeless people to stay in? I don't know.
Yeah. I think there's solutions. We're going to move now, Mikayla, to Len. So Len has joined. I can't see which person you are here, Len, but Len is from Quint Development, and Quint Development's well known here in Saskatoon, with more than a quarter-century experience, not just sort of trying to work with affordable housing, but trying to build a better community. And so Len is about to retire, but we are really grateful for all the years you put in and all the knowledge and the stuff you built here. So we'd be very willing to hear from you tonight about your thoughts about our crisis and possible solutions. So I don't know which one you are to unmute, Len. You want to? Hopefully that will work.
Can you hear me now?
I can.
Okay, great. Well, thanks,
There you
Claire.
are.
Yeah. Well, thanks for inviting me. I was just at a meeting this morning with the federal housing advocate with a number of other folks, including the chief of the fire department and senior police and other CBOs, Salvation Army. And I think the term that we were all using and very seriously was a crisis in our community right now. And I just got off the phone with a few of my Quint board members who work at various CBOs, and they were just relaying to me the numbers of people that they're seeing is just growing dramatically, and the issues that those people are experiencing are becoming more and more acute. And so people are feeling very much like this is an unprecedented situation in terms of the homelessness crisis in Saskatoon. So I'll just to talk a bit about that. I don't know if anybody mentioned yet, but there was a homelessness point in time homelessness count last summer. At that point, we wasn't fully staffed with volunteers, but they counted 550 people at that time. That is a record high. They've been doing homelessness counts for the last 10 or 15 years. And that's by far the highest number that we've ever seen. And the real numbers are probably significantly higher because they don't get to survey all the homeless people. And the number of encampments that we see, especially in the West Side core neighborhoods, is unprecedented in my view. And they're popping up all over the place, including all around our office at Station 20 West. And so we've never seen that before. And this is all complicated by things like shelter bed closures, like we see what's going on with the lighthouse. So at the time of unprecedented need, our ability to respond to it is reduced. So it's all leading to a perfect storm in that regard. And we see a significant increase in issues related to mental health and addictions. And according to the homelessness count, that was the second most common cause of homelessness, is people facing addictions and mental health issues. And then on top of that all, we see dramatic increase of gang activity in the community. Violence, vandalism is rapidly increasing. And then we see, of course, Mikayla alluded to this, things are becoming more expensive. Inflation has hit hard, and especially hard for low-income renters in our community. So there's things like increased food costs and utilities and rents in our city. So we're seeing a significant increase in shelter usage and warm-up places almost everywhere in the city right now. And just to highlight that, this year at Quint, we've opened up a weekend warm-up space at Station 20 West. Since December, we got some funding to do that. We were sort of planning on maybe 15, maybe 20 people a day would use it, but we're averaging 80 to 100 or more each day at the warm-up place. We were just blown away by those numbers. And just as a quick aside, all the places that are currently providing warm-up services, everybody's funding expires at the end of March. So we're all sort of bracing ourselves for what's going to happen April 1st going forward, when all the existing warm-up spaces close down. And then just to make matters even more complicated, CMHC just put out a report that showed there was a significant increase in the rent in Saskatoon, and vacancy rates are dropping, which means it's going to be tougher and tougher to find adequate, affordable spaces, housing units for people. And then I just want to talk a little bit about the changes to the Saskatchewan Income Support Program, which I think is even further compounding the problem in our city, and maybe is one of the drivers of it, actually. And I had a little slide that I would show if I was on my laptop, but I'll just tell you what it says. It's basically a comparison of what the Saskatchewan Income Support Program pays people for shelter allowance compared to what the average apartment costs to rent in Saskatoon. So I'll just use one example. If you're a family, say a parent with 1 or 2 children, you would get $1,000 a month on shelter allowance from SIS, the Income Support Program. But a two or three bedroom apartment, the average rent in Saskatoon is $1,243. So right there, SIS shelter allowance is $243 a month, short of paying what the average rent for a 2 or 3 bedroom apartment is. But in addition to that, that shelter allowance for $1,000 is supposed to pay your utilities. So you're already in a deficit just to pay the rent, and you have absolutely no money left to cover your utility costs. And of course, if you get in arrears with the utility companies and they cut you off, then the landlord has no choice but to evict those people, because they can't live without utilities. And just as an aside, so if you're facing a deficit before you pay your utilities of $243 a month, the additional adult basic benefit you get for food and all other expenses on SIS is $285. So you've virtually used all your other basic benefits just to cover your basic rent, and you haven't paid for utilities or food or transportation or anything else. So that's the situation under SIS. But in addition to the shelter allowance not covering the full cost of housing, one of the other things that the change to SIS did was it stopped direct payments of their shelter allowance to their landlords and direct payments of utilities to the utility companies. And so what they're now doing is they're putting the shelter allowance directly in people's bank accounts. And then they're saying this is helping, in their words, helping to promote responsibility for people on assistance. And they're supposed to go to the bank, withdraw the money, go over to the landlord office, pay the rent, go over to the utility office and pay the utilities. Whereas before, under the old SAP program, that could be done directly. And so the check would be mailed directly to your landlord. Well, one of the problems is that we know that people who are experiencing really low incomes have a lot of other debts, and they owe people money, and they're walking out of the bank with their $1,000 shelter allowance check, and the money is not getting to their landlords. And so the amount of people facing arrears and bad debt to their landlords is increasing, and that's directly leading to people facing evictions and increasing the homelessness in our city. And not only that, but then the transition to the Saskatchewan Income Support Program changed the way damage deposits were delivered. So there's not sufficient damage deposits. I think right now they're saying they would allow a one-time $500 damage deposit for people, and you only get that once every 2 years. Well, we know that a lot of people who are very transient are moving much more than once every 2 years. And if you don't have a damage deposit, it's a major barrier to signing a lease with another landlord. So it's really putting up a huge amount of barriers for low-income people to find adequate, affordable rental housing. And to make matters even more complicated, the federal government just rolled out the Canada Housing Benefit as part of the National Housing Strategy. And the housing benefit was to supplement low-income people to be able to pay the rent for about $200 or $300 a month, which would make a huge difference. And but the Ministry of Social Services has said that people collecting Saskatchewan Income Support Program are not eligible for the rental housing benefit. So it's even a further barrier. And of course, the big question is, that's who the housing benefit was designed for. And the question for Ministry of Social Services, why are they making people on SIS ineligible? Well, I think I can speculate on that. They would call that double dipping. So anyways, so there's a lot of issues around the SIS, and I think SIS has been a major contributor to the rapidly rising homelessness numbers in Saskatoon. And I'll just use our example as a case. We have about 100 units of subsidized affordable rental housing at Quint. And if I had my computer, I would show you this graph. But normally, our rent arrears would be stable at around maybe somewhere in the neighborhood of $5,000 a month. But when SIS was rolled out and made mandatory across the province at the end of August of 2021, we saw rent arrears jump to more than like almost $22,000 that in that month, and the month after it exceeded $26,000, and it's stayed above around $15,000 to $20,000 ever since. So we're seeing a direct correlation to the introduction of the new Saskatchewan income support program and people facing arrears and evictions from their housing. And it's not just us nonprofit housing providers that are seeing this. We've been working with the Saskatchewan Landlords Association, and those are the private landlords, and they're seeing the exact same. It's like a mirror image to our experience. They were seeing a direct correlation to the rollout of SIS and increased numbers of renters in arrears, people facing bad debt, and evictions from their place. And it's gotten so bad, and that the CEO of the Saskatchewan Landlords Association is saying a lot of their members will not even consider renting to people who are collecting the Saskatchewan income support shelter allowance, because they're not going to get their rent paid under that program. And we've tried to advocate this to the ministry officials and the minister, and we just and it's basically their response is it's a success, and housing prices in Saskatchewan are the most affordable in the country. And what's the problem? They're saying it's success. Meanwhile, on the ground, we're all it's unanimous that it's an unmitigated disaster. If I could, I just want to read you one quote that we have from one person that spoke to us, and they said, quote, "Inflation is skyrocketing. I can't keep up with SIS. It's affecting young people and old people. Either I'm going to pay the rent and bills or buy food. We get threatened by utility companies, and we are cut off for a month without hot water and heat." She knows many, including her aunt, whose utilities have been cut off, forcing them to move into encampments. So that's just one personal quote I wanted to share with you guys. Finally, I think, on Monday night in Riversdale, the Riversdale BID organized a public meeting on community safety. So the business community is realizing that this is an issue. It's kind of parallel to the concerns that were going on downtown around response to homelessness and homeless people on the streets. And of course, they all are pointing fingers at municipal government. But really, the policies that are going to solve this issue are not the municipal government. What's happening is the lack of strategies coming from the province or downloading a lot of these costs onto municipalities, because emergency services like fire and police are just having to respond more and more to all the crises that are happening in our community. But what are some additional policies that we should be considering? More and more, there are not nearly enough mental health and addiction support services in our communities. And we've been calling for this for years, so have a lot of other people. So that we need more mental health and addictions support in our community. We need more affordable housing for people at risk. And not only more affordable, it's not just the bricks and mortar, but we need appropriate supports for people so that they can be successful in their housing. And that is virtually almost non-existent right now. We need subsidies for those operating nonprofit housing providers to cover the additional support services and the real operating costs to provide affordable housing. Right now, it's a losing money proposition, because in our case, we're providing rents at below market, and the costs of providing that are going up and up, and the damages we're experiencing, the turnovers and the bad debt and the arrears we're facing are making it a non-sustainable proposition right now. One of the things that we talk about all the time is that government agencies are releasing people into homelessness. So for example, people are being released from hospitals with no place to live. So they're being discharged from and they're supposed to be recovering from whatever they're in for, but they're releasing them into homelessness. Same with jails. We have people being released from provincial jails, and there's absolutely no consideration. No, they're not set up with on Saskatchewan income support programs. They have no place to live. They're just shoved out the door, and they're supposed to fend for themselves. And not only that, but Ministry of Social Services are, when kids are aging out of care, there's no consideration to ensuring that they have safe, appropriate housing when they leave, when they're turning 18 years old. And so they're being aged out of care into homelessness. So that's an easy policy solution that all government agencies need to address. And of course, we've seen the shelters are struggling. They're funded on a per diem basis. They really need to be block funded because they have fixed costs, but they have variable funding. So it's an unsustainable model, and it's insufficient funding to do the work that they need to do. And lastly, we just need to make sure that people have adequate income so they can live decent lives and afford decent housing and buy food. So we have the lowest minimum wage in Canada, and that needs to be addressed. We probably should be talking about some form of living wage. We saw that during the pandemic, when the feds were rolling out the emergency response benefits, $2,000 a month, we saw an unprecedented drop in poverty rates in Canada as a result of that. And so it can be done, and it should be done. And I'll just end by saying, people are going to say, well, these are all great ideas, but how do we afford them? We can't afford to do all that stuff. And really, all the data now is showing that really we can't afford not to do those things. It costs more to keep people homeless than it does to house them. And it's way more expensive when you look at all the emergency services that go on related to it, in terms of police, in terms of hospitals, in terms of jails. It's super expensive way to continue doing things. And investments in housing people and supporting them, and operating funding to support them will result in significant social returns to governments, and ultimately save taxpayers money, a lot of money in the end. So we have a lot of people pointing fingers at the municipal government, but all the policy levers to resolve this crisis lie with the provincial government. So that's where we need to look for solutions. And I'll just leave it at that level right there. Thanks.
Thanks, Len. Great information. I was reading online that the Finnish government has a very robust support system, and they have one support worker for every 3 people in their housing program. So to help them fill out forms, to get them employment, to get them back and forth to where they need to go until they can move to an independent living situation. And they've been very happy with their program. So now I'm going to introduce Jenny Kwan. Jenny is a member of parliament. She's the NDP housing critic. She has lots of experience from her work with the Vancouver downtown east side about the crisis, and we'd be very happy to hear what she has to say. Over to you, Jenny. Let's see.
Okay, here we go. I just got unmuted. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
Thanks. Okay, well, thanks very much, everyone, and thank you for inviting me to come and participate in this town hall meeting, this very important issue around the housing crisis in Canada. I think many of the speakers, and even as we were doing our rounds of introduction, people were already saying it, that housing is a basic human right. And according to the National Housing Strategy Act, which was passed in 2019, the right to adequate housing is a fundamental human right, as affirmed in international law. But in reality, what we see every day in our community is that that is not the case. And we see people who are unhoused, people who are in very precarious situations, and people, frankly, in danger because they don't have proper housing, and they're putting their lives at risk, in this freezing temperature and with the lack of housing that they are faced with. And that is the reality. So from the Democrats' point of view, we fully support a human rights approach or human rights-based approach to housing. And that means that every single person in Canada must have access to safe, affordable, and adequate housing as a basic human right. Right now, what we're seeing is this. We have an estimated 235,000 Canadians who experience homelessness in any 1 year, and of which about 45% are living with a physical or mental disability. And in any one night, there are approximately 25,000 to 35,000 people who experience homelessness in this country. So you can just imagine in Saskatoon, you were saying that there are about 500 people who are experiencing homelessness. This is being replicated in pretty well every single community across the country, where there is a homelessness crisis, where people can't access safe, secure, affordable housing. The degree to which that crisis for them will vary depending on the size of the community. In my own home community in Vancouver East, here in the downtown east side, the homelessness crisis is exponential. We had the largest homeless encampment in the country, not for a month, not for a week, but for years. And that's what we had. Inflationary pressures that we're seeing right now is added increased pressure to the housing crisis. And what's happening also is that housing is being treated as a commodity, what we call the financialization of housing. And that's also escalated the crisis. So financialization of housing is when rental housing is turned into a financial investment and is being treated as a commodity, as though it's a stock market for people to turn a profit. And effectively, financialization prioritizes profit making over affordability, the tenant's rights or the tenant's quality of life, and environmental goals. And coincidentally, but perhaps not coincidentally, from 1996 to 2021, real estate investment trusts, and these are corporate landlords effectively, grew from holding 0 to almost 200,000 rental suites, residential suites. And financial firms are 17 of the top 25 largest landlords in Canada. And these financial firms, they hold more than 344,000 suites. So you can just sort of take that in for a minute. And this all happened right at the time around when the federal government, the federal Liberal government, withdrew from the National Housing Program in 1993. So, and the impact of this has been very significant, and we see it all across the country. I was working as a community legal advocate at the time when the federal government announced that they were canceling the National Affordable Housing Program, I almost lost my mind, because I was helping people in the downtown east side, trying to find housing, trying to address already that housing crisis that existed in the 1990s. But yet the federal government just decided to walk away. And by doing that, what have they done? They downloaded the cost of housing and the impact of homelessness to the province and to local governments. And we're seeing that effect here today. Now, the truth also is this: successive governments, though, also led to the accumulation of the cancellation of the National Affordable Housing Program. Conservatives were in government prior to the Liberals, and successive Liberal conservative governments, they actually started to erode support for a national housing program. And then all the way up till 1993, when the feds literally just walked away. To put in context, had the government not walked away between 1993 to 2015, at the pace to which housing was being built, and that is social housing and co-op housing that was being built at that time, Canada would have had more than 500,000 units of social housing and co-op housing in our country. So you can imagine what that could do to our community today if you guys had, across the country, if we had these additional units. And it's already established from people who spoke before me that the vast majority of the people who are unhoused or at risk of losing their homes simply can't afford the cost of rent. That is the reality that they face. Poverty is the underpinning issue behind this as well. Homelessness already costs Canadians over $7 billion per year. And this will only grow as homelessness increases and demands on public systems like our healthcare, the policing, the court system, the judicial system, social services, and so on. So it was said that, we can't afford not to ensure people are housed, that housing is a right. And aside from the damage to humanity and to the individual and their families, the damage is also, frankly, for those who only cares about the money, is in the pocketbook as well. It doesn't make economic sense to actually keep people unhoused and not provide safe, affordable housing for them. To further complicate and to expand the problems of affordability in housing, I should also note that house prices have grown by more than 30% since the start of COVID, since the pandemic. So in the face of pandemic, people were losing their jobs. And then, yes, the government came in with the CERB, which was absolutely essential, that the NDP had pushed really hard to get that in place. But that said, inflationary costs, and then landlords also increased the cost of rent significantly during the pandemic period. Now, the Liberals, after they canceled the National Affordable Housing Program in 1993, and when the election was held in 2015, they all said, we're back, and, it's a new era and all that kind of stuff. And the Liberals introduced a new National Affordable Housing Program. And that was announced with the Prime Minister with much fanfare in 2017. But now more than 5 years have passed since the creation of the National Housing Strategy. What are the results? We're seeing the housing crisis worsening. The recent Auditor General report show that the government doesn't even know whether the housing units that they're building that are developed for people are actually meeting their needs. They have no idea who the housing is building for. They have no idea if those in greatest need is actually accessing this housing. And, I can't tell you how distressing that is. And meanwhile, we're losing housing because the corporate landlords are coming in to sweep up these units. And just to put that in context, for every unit that the government builds, we lose 15. The current situation is where we're at right now. So what are we seeing in the community? We're seeing shelters at overcapacity. 10 cities are expanding throughout the country. Unhoused people are literally, they're dying on the streets. We have situations where people actually died because they couldn't get access to housing. So what we have to do when we talk about solution is that we need to revamp the national housing strategy. And the focus has to be a human rights-based focus. And we currently right now, what we have is that the government focusing in on delivering housing that largely supports the private sector and is directed to financial firms while creating very little affordable housing. And their definition of what's affordable is also a big fat joke, because a lot of the programs that come out is set at the rent where is above market, somewhere between 30 to 120% above market. So consequently, this is not affordable housing. People can't afford to get into these units. So we need to sort of revamp the way we do housing. I firmly believe, and the NDP firmly believes, that the government needs to get back into the business of housing in a serious way, and to show that leadership. That means that we need to build social housing, true affordable housing, not this sort of a co-opted version of affordable. We need to provide subsidies. Len actually raised it. I came from the nonprofit sector as well. The nonprofit sector needs to be supported with their operation of the housing, and that means subsidies, and that has to be in place. We also need supportive services. People have different needs in the community, and those supportive services are an essential ingredient to ensuring that people are going to be successful in their housing. We need to stop the financialization of housing, stop treating housing like it is the stock market. Housing is for people to live in. It is not there for people to turn a profit and for corporate landlords to make a quick buck. That's not what it is for, and we need to stop that practice. And what that means is that the federal government needs to put a moratorium on the purchase of housing by these real estate investment trusts or these corporate landlords, to say, no, you do not get to actually flip housing and make it unaffordable to rental evict people so that you can make a quick buck. We also need to stop the preferential tax treatment for these corporate landlords. They get such a sweet deal. It's so ridiculous that they get CMHC, the government agency, to give them loan guarantees to rental evict people. And then on top of that, they get preferential tax treatment because they don't have to pay taxes at a corporate rate, even though they function like a corporation. And so they get a huge tax break, and that too needs to stop. We need the federal government to create an acquisition fund for nonprofits so that they can get in there to buy the rental housing stock when they come onto the market, so that we can retain the stock and not continue to lose the housing stock. We need to put in anti-inflationary measures. You know, back in the day, we actually did have those in place. Rent control was actually in place across the country. Work with the provinces to put that in. And I would venture to say what we need is what I would say is vacancy control. And so therefore is holding the rent of the unit when someone leaves at that rate, and not and for that control not to just be with the person, but with the unit, so that you can hold the rent at that rate. Because what's happening a lot now, and we saw this particularly in this housing crunch, is that people are getting evicted, the rents are getting jacked up, people are getting evicted, and when they leave, they jack up the rent even more. And so we have to make sure that there's a measure of rent control, and to ensure that the rent is held at the rate that is affordable to people. And finally, I would say this, I mean, there are lots of other measures, but I'm just throwing some of these ideas out there in terms of what the federal government should do. I'll close with this last piece, and that is that we need a guaranteed livable income. That's what we need to ensure that people live in dignity and be able to buy food, and to be able to have housing, proper housing. And it was mentioned that with the pandemic, with CERB, the government found a way to do it. We can do it again. So I'll leave it there, and happy to take questions.
Very helpful, Jenny. I loved to hear some of those solutions. We get frustrated at the municipal level because that's here in our face, but we don't always have the power levers to do much about it other than the small things we can do to tinker around the edges. So everyone, I've put in the chat that if you have a question for any of the panelists, please go ahead and type them in. If you'd like to type a comment or say a comment as well, that would be great. And make sure that when you do your remarks, to allow everybody to participate, that you try to keep yourself fairly brief, okay? So while we're waiting for people to enter their questions, certainly I have, we've heard a lot about how we can cut the pie differently. We need a bigger pie, or we ask other groups to give us a slice of theirs. And that brings up conversations about how we fund our other public services like the police and fire services, mental health, addictions. How do we put it all together? So what locally here, I guess I would like to hear from the speakers what they think about our best move forward that we can do to help people that have housing insecurity and are unhoused. Kathy's got her hand up.
There we go. So, sorry, Claire, I just wanted to let people know that, I'll turn on my video. You're probably seeing a lot of Tanya Fredettes on the names of people that have joined the meeting tonight. And just to explain that Tanya Fredette is the federal organizer for the NDP for our area. And she arranged for people to join the meeting through her Zoom account. So there's quite a few Tanya Fredettes, but I don't know if people can change that in their settings or not. But if you could identify yourself as someone other than Tanya Fredette, that would be great. I know that there's not 7 Tanya Fredettes here.
Right, so it'd be hard for me to call on someone. If you go to the 3 dots next to your name, if you push on participants on the bottom line, you'll get to see who's in the meeting. And if you click the 3 dots next to your name, you can actually rename yourself. So, so let's see, would Len, Mikayla, or Jenny want to say something about my question about what our best move forward might be?
I can jump in. Should I jump in and offer some thoughts?
Yes.
Okay. We do have a federal budget coming up. And so I think it would be really good for people to contact their local member of parliament, to contact the Minister of Finance, to contact the Prime Minister, go on social media, send them letters, phone their offices to demand that housing be a right. And to demand for the federal government to show true leadership in the provision of housing. And so any number of the suggestions that have been put forward is, you can sort of put that forward. And then also to share the lived experiences, because what is happening in the community for the people who are unhoused is real. They're not nameless, faceless people. It's happening in our communities. So people can share different perspectives, people with lived experiences, the NGOs, the nonprofit organizations who are working to try to support people who are unhoused, for example, and the challenges that you face and why you need these measures to be in place. For you as a concerned citizen, that, Canada is a wealthy country and we can afford to do this. And for people who say that we can't afford to do it, I will simply just say this, right? The government can afford to give subsidies to big industry, to CEOs, to big oil, and they don't blink an eye and they do it. And we're talking about billions of dollars, but yet they can't provide housing to ensure that those who are most in need, who are most marginalized in our community, have access to safe, secure, affordable housing when they themselves declare that in 2019, that housing is a basic right. So I think you can absolutely make that demand. And even if whether they do it or not in the budget, we'll see, but pressure them and continue to pressure them. Do not let them off the hook. And I would say this, all levels of government have responsibility, and we need all levels of government working together to address the housing crisis. It's not one or the other. Everybody's in it. But the federal government has to show real leadership in doing this. They walked away in 1993, and the patchwork approach so far is ineffective, and that has been established by an independent officer of the House to say the government doesn't know what they're doing. Buck up, do better.
Thanks, Jenny. I see Bob's hand up, but I'm just going to maybe summarize a couple of the questions here. Kathy Sproul asked about why the rent controls disappeared, and is there a mechanism to get them back?
Am I muted? Can
No.
you hear me?
Yeah.
Well, we haven't had rent controls in Saskatchewan for probably 25 years. So that crossed from both Conservative and NDP governments. I remember once about asking the NDP why that they should impose rent controls, but they were opposed to it, saying that it would. The argument is that it's going to decrease. It's going to be a disincentive to provide more housing, and it'll decrease the stock. That's the basic argument that we got. But we haven't had rent controls here for at least 25 years.
Rent control was phased out. We used to actually have rent control as a national program back in the day when there was a national housing crisis at that time. And rent control, the federal government declared that that's what they wanted to do, and then worked across the country, provinces and territories, to put that in place. And it got put in place. Then it got phased out. And then now it's really basically up to provinces if they want to have it. And so we have, some provinces who have it. In British Columbia, we have it. Manitoba has a version of rent control. PEI has a version of rent control, as an example. In the face of our current situation right now with the housing crisis, I actually think that, a national approach to rent control is warranted. This housing crisis is everywhere across the country, and we can, put in a variety of measures to both address the housing crisis with the stick, but you can also do it with incentives too. So take, for example, if we want to see more housing to be built, you can put some criteria on affordability for the private sector. And then, for example, you can waive the GST in that development. So then you can actually do a stick and carrot kind of approach to sort of entice the development of housing. But rent control, I think, is a premise that needs to be put in place, especially in the face of this inflationary measure. Another piece, someone said, actually, there are a lot of empty units in Saskatchewan at the moment. In BC, we actually, the government, the provincial government and the city of Vancouver actually put in a empty home tax requirement. And so that is to say, if you have a housing unit that is sitting empty, you actually have to pay a tax on that. And you can, so there are a variety of different measures that can be put in place to increase the affordable rental housing stock, as well from the private sector and from the government. And then in the meantime, to stop the financialization of housing so you don't have further erosion of the existing rental stock.
Great. Another question for the panel. Darlene wants to know if interministries are working together on housing, mental health, social services, and is there a federal mechanism really around to get them to work together?
I would say it's not happening at all. There used to be the Intersectoral Committee on Human Services. That was dissolved about, 5 or 6 years ago, maybe more. There really does need to be more intersectoral collaborations to really solve these issues. The one thing I did hear this morning from the federal housing advocate was she was speaking to the Deputy Minister of Housing in Saskatchewan and basically saying that they're at loggerheads between the province and the feds. And so they're saying the feds are trying to impose conditions with the funding, with the federal housing strategy funding, and the province is rejecting those. And that's a good case is the Canada Housing Benefit, which is being misappropriated in Saskatchewan. But I think they really need, I think that's happening across Canada, where provinces are not living up to the principles of the National Housing Strategy. And I think it's a bit like the Medicare Public Health Care Act. The funding needs to come tied with some principles, and right now it's not. So I think that's one thing the federal government could do is tie the funding to some principles that they of how it needs to be expended in each province.
Just on that question as well, you know, you're right. The collaboration between governments is not great, and it's definitely not getting housing delivered. There are some provinces who you can barely drag screaming and kicking to the table to do that. So with that being said, you know, one thing that the federal government can try and do is to incentivize people, but it does have to come with some criteria in terms of the delivery and the affordability of that housing, which would be key. You know, federal dollars on the table, and it could be, you know, the province coming in with matching funds, let's say, to deliver X amount of units, etc. So anyway, there's a range of approaches to sort of how to formulate that. Another way to get around it too, there's some provinces perhaps won't do it no matter what, and then you can have a situation where you can go to the municipality directly. And currently, actually, out of the last budget with our confidence supply agreement that the NDP has with the Liberals, one component piece within that is the accelerator fund. And where we're saying to the government that you need to put these dollars in working in collaboration with local governments to deliver housing. And then aside from addressing administrative issues in terms of getting housing permits and all of those things through, but what you also need to do is to ensure that nonprofits have access to that funding to develop housing, and then to put that affordability criteria to it. The other thing that we said is that, you know, with funding program from the federal government, because housing is, and especially with the rising cost of construction and inflationary costs and so on, these programs need to be stackable. So that is to say that the nonprofit will be able to access this pocket of funding through other programs within the federal government or provincial government, municipal government, or anywhere else to actually maximize the affordability of the housing.
Yeah.
Bob, do you want to, you have a comment? Bob Eaton?
Yeah, I do. I'd like to challenge all of the local councillors and MLAs to live on CIS for 2 months. Not only for 1 month, but for 2 months, so that they can really assess what the effect is.
Yeah, I agree. It's brutal. Jacob had a couple of comments. I don't know, Jacob, I'm going to have to pick my favorite here. With a provincial and a municipal election next year and a federal election potentially the year after, where should our focus be?
Maybe I can just jump in and offer my thoughts on that. On the federal side, I think housing has to take front and center, you know, stage in terms of need in the next election. We have it right now in terms of the housing crisis. Everybody's experiencing it, and it's getting worse and worse. And the challenge, I think, to all parties is this: is not just the development or production of housing or any housing. It has to be affordable housing that meet people's needs. It has to be housing that will address, I think, as well, those who are in core need, and in supporting their success in these in the housing, and then also for the nonprofits to operate.
I would agree. And I would add that we need to talk about making sure that people's incomes are sufficient as well. So, and actually there are two sides of the same coin, because people spend especially low income folks, they spend most of their income on housing anyways. So if we can increase, we can either invest a hell of a lot more in creating more affordable housing, or we should invest in making sure people have adequate incomes to pay for the existing housing.
Yeah. Sam, you had your hand up.
Yeah, thanks, Claire. With response to this same last question, I'm glad to see Jennifer Bose attending this meeting today, but I must say I'm embarrassed to see where provincial NDP has been on many of these issues on homelessness, poverty, racism, and so on. No one person to this minute used the word racism, which is a huge factor of the people who are suffering homelessness and poverty. And I like to see the provincial New Democratic Party talk a little more in the House what we want to do instead of moving closer and closer to Scott Moore. We need to separate ourselves and stand on our own feet and talk about what we will be doing in the future if we ever form government. I'll stop there.
Okay. Another comment from Andrea Schussbergen was, what is the most impactful ways for citizens to help with the issue? I know, Mikayla, you might want to say something here.
Sorry, what was the question again?
What do you think the most impactful way for citizens to help with the issue?
When you're driving down 20th Street, stop your car and get out and say hi to someone on the sidewalk. Engage people, get to know them, understand that unhoused people are the same people as you and me. They had jobs once, they had a family that cared for them once. They had employment once. I mean, I think engagement is, and giving voice to unhoused people. That was one of our first goals with our Unhoused Peoples Initiative, was just to give a voice to unhoused people so that we can hear what it is that they need instead of them always being told what they need. Right? I think too, hierarchy of needs and shelter is just one aspect to all of this. It's important that housing is getting all the coverage that it is, especially in Canada, where, you know, we reach -40 temperatures. We can't have people living outside. But, there's also other needs that everyone has as well. Like I mentioned at the beginning, the simple need of access to a toilet. Things people don't even think about: a toothbrush, air cone. Housing, that the concept of housing first is I think kind of points in that direction. Once you get people in their shelters, then you can start addressing their other needs.
Yeah, I agree. Lots of studies have shown that. We had a question about a return of the co-op housing program. Can any of you speak to what's going on there?
I can certainly jump in about the housing program. And thank you for that comment from the individual, because the co-op housing program was hugely successful. And of course, in 1993, when the federal Liberals canceled the National Affordable Housing Program, co-op housing also went with it. In the last budget, we saw a small investment back into co-op housing. And that investment, unfortunately, what the government did was to take that money from another housing stream to reallocate it to housing, and what we really into co-op housing. What we really need is the former programs, what we had. You know, the saying goes, if it's working, don't try to fix it. The co-op program was working, and the only problem was that the government walked away from it. So bringing that program back would be very significant in terms of providing the much needed housing stock and also building communities. As we know, co-ops is fantastic.
Yeah, we have a number of those in town, and having been out on the doorstep there, people love them, and they're so sad when the funding disappears for them because they're so successful, and they've been a really good thing for our community. Terry Harris, you have your hand up. It could be Doug. Can you unmute?
Mute.
There you go.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm just sitting here listening to all this, and I mean, I'm thinking not only from a local but a national policy, national perspective, and what I'm hearing is that we're want to be building these and all the rest of it. I think we have to go back to some of the basic NDP principles, and that's about nationalization. We have, as we've pointed out and heard tonight, we have these large, usually multinational real estate REITs, corporations out there that have made huge profits on both sides of the borders with housing. So what we need to do, if we want to solve the problem of the vast amounts of homelessness, as well as the many that are functionally unhomed will be unhomed because of the change in interest rates, that are now actually homeowners that will fall into the rental category that still won't be able to, because they'll have this huge debts and all the other issues that we talked about of inability to be able to rent. So I think in the long run, to be able to solve this problem, we need to nationalize those type of organizations that would stop the corporate for-profit manipulation of the housing market. And of course, in the long run, it would provide housing in all sorts of different locations within communities, neighborhoods, and cities, because that's the other issue that we come across. I mean, we only look at the whole NIMBY process that we've all heard of, and some of us have experienced. So ultimately, for solutions based to this particular issue, I think that is the only way that we need to go. And it also solves many of the location issues for those that are marginalized, to be close to be services, etc. Because transportation is a huge factor for many folks, regardless of their social economic status. And especially if we move toward changes in transportation and the greening of it. So anyway, I think that's where we need to do first for a practical approach. Thank you.
I'm just going to, I hope our speakers can hang on just for a minute. We did start a little bit late. A related question from Jacob was about the policy approaches to basically stop people from treating real estate like an investment. How do we cultivate a nation in which people treat houses as a place to live, not a place to get a profit out of?
It's a big
Maybe
question.
maybe I'll jump in there to raise some solutions in that regard. I think first and foremost, the federal government needs to actually say, no, we will not support housing being treated as a commodity. So as a start, we're going to put a moratorium on it. That means there are no more opportunities for REITs to buy residential housing, right? And just to say, we're going to stop that practice right now. I think also, on the flip side of it is that there are, you know, apartment buildings, residential housing stock may well come on the market. And what we need to do is to support the nonprofits and create an acquisition fund for nonprofits so that they can get into the market to buy those buildings. And so then we can hold the housing stock and keep it at nonprofit hands. It's a little bit like the nationalization kind of concept, but accepting that it's the nonprofits who hold it in perpetuity and ensure that the housing is provided to the people as affordable housing. The other thing to do is to simply say, and we need to change this tax policy. It's just zero justification for REITs and these corporate landlords to have preferential tax treatment. They do not pay the corporate tax rate. And if we charge them the corporate tax rate, and we should charge them on the corporate tax rate, so they don't get a free pass, they don't get a free lunch on the tax preferential tax treatment. And when we collect that tax return, that should be invested into housing. And then that's another piece that sort of deals with the financialization of housing as well. You know, the government can also say, stop allowing for the speculation of housing to take place. And this is what's happening right now, that there's a lot of speculation going on where people are treating housing again as an investment. And you can stop that speculation. You can put in speculation tax as well. Actually, in other jurisdictions in New Zealand, they have a very interesting sort of model in place. And I think we should be putting that in place as well, where people are buying secondary homes. So beyond primary homes, they actually have they have a measure that deals with the mortgage requirement. Because a lot of that speculation is about cash flow. And so we can look at those kinds of measures. So for Canada, for example, we could say what other jurisdictions have done is, if it's secondary home and third and fourth and so on, or multiplex units and so on, that you actually require the mortgage to actually incrementally increase. You know, instead of 20% down payment is for your secondary property is 40%. Etc. So then you kind of stop this speculation that's going on, that's pushing the cost of housing up, and to try and sort of put some measures in place to address that. So these are just some examples of what can be done, and of course there are other possibilities as well. But definitely to start with some of these measures would be a good place.
I really like Jenny's suggestion about a fund for nonprofits to buy up some of the stock. And I'll give you an example of what happened in Saskatoon about 3 or 4 years ago. I don't know if people recall the Prairie Heights condo building that got condemned, and all the owners of the condo were forced to sell. We went and then it was put up on the market, that whole building. It's about an 8-story, maybe 100 units of 100 units in there. We went and walked through it, and I think it was selling for like $2.5 million, really cheap, but it probably needed another $5 million of renovations to it. Well, for the nonprofit sector to consider buying it, which we were trying to, that takes us probably over a year of writing applications to Saskatchewan Housing Corporation or CMHC, getting all their approval, jumping through all the hoops. In the meantime, Main Street walks in with a suitcase full of money, cash on the barrelhead, and bought it right from under us. And that's they renovated it, and now it's another one of Main Street's properties in the city. Now, if anybody knows moves around Saskatoon, you'll see that Main Street is probably the biggest real estate investment trust in the city. They own a huge number of apartments in the city here, and they're buying a lot in the core neighborhoods. And they're so that would be a real boost if there was ways that the nonprofit housing sector could start acquiring some of those properties in our city.
One more comment that maybe I've got from David Dion here, that the Refugee Assistance Program rates for Saskatoon today gives $575 to a single person for housing, which is completely ridiculous. The amount maxes out at $1,150 for a family of 4 and doesn't increase no matter how large your family size is. So refugees are being priced out of the market before even arriving in Canada. How can we meaningfully help people with this kind of type of assistance? That's pretty bad.
Well, it's like the CIS. It's similar to CIS, I guess.
I know a lot of faith groups help refugees. I've been involved in some of those where the faith group agrees to help a family for a year or so, and hopefully someone has been able to fill out all the complicated forms on social assistance, but also hopefully get employment as well once their English, improves or whatever. So these are real challenges for people adjusting and often suffering from trauma and family dislocation and all the adjusting to Saskatchewan, which isn't easy and is a place where there is a lot of racism. So these are real concerns for everybody.
Yeah, I think it also speaks to the need, of course, for guaranteed livable income, whether you're a refugee coming to Canada or for people who are already in Canada struggling, living in poverty, people with disabilities, and so on and so forth, right? And that goes to that fundamental question that has been raised as well, addressing the issue around poverty. I think it goes hand in hand on the refugee situation too. And someone raised the issue around racism. It was just, I think it was yesterday in the news here in British Columbia, because the vacancy rates are so low and because the housing crisis is so intense, that landlords are outright putting in their ads to say things like no Indians, as an example. Just outright disgusting and gross discriminatory practices, just putting it like right out there. And so, these issues are tied, they're intrinsically tied, and we do need to take it head on. And with the federal government, it really just is so challenging for me to see the federal government say things like, and pass into law, into legislation, that housing is basic human right back in 1993, but yet their action do not actually match those words. Is so far from it that I'm just speechless. And so, maybe part of the campaign we can start with saying housing is a basic human right, and let's stop the financialization of housing and create an acquisition fund for nonprofits, as one example. I mean, there are many, many aspects that we can sort of push forward, but yeah, and I don't know. I come from the nonprofit, so I fundamentally believe in the power of the people, and then galvanizing the strength of the people to pressure politicians, decision makers, no matter who and what stripe, to do what is needed and what is right. And then to add as well that it is also something that would be financially beneficial to the country as a whole.
Mm-hmm. Completely. Well, I know it's getting late, everyone. I thought we'd just give our speakers just a few seconds to say a few closing words. Mikayla, would you like to start? I'm just going to try to get you to unmute. There you go.
Yes. Thank you for having me. I'm glad that people are coming together to address this issue of homelessness. I do hope we find some solutions in the future. Thanks.
Len, would you like to go next?
Yeah, sure. Well, thanks for the opportunity to profile this issue. Like we all mentioned at our meeting this morning with the federal housing advocate, I think it was everybody was saying we're in a unprecedented housing and homelessness crisis in the city here, and we really need to start taking action here because the police and the fire departments are getting they're preoccupied with dealing with encampments and homeless people, and our emergency rooms are getting jammed up, and our jails are getting filled up, and it's just not a healthy or an economical way to carry on. So we really need to find solutions and do it quickly. Thanks.
Thanks, Len. I'm going to take Robert up on his offer of posting our video here on the YouTube channel, I guess, of the Metro Association. Jenny, would you like to go next?
Yeah, I'll just quickly say thank you to everyone, and thank you for inviting me to be part of this panel. It warms my heart to engage with the community and to see people as engaged citizens to highlight this issue and to demand change, and that's what we need. And so happy to work with all of you. I know in the chat someone asked to see where can I get some of these reports on some of these issues, and so what I'll do is I'll send the links to Tanya to be shared with everyone. A lot of these reports and the data that I'm gathering is actually on the public record, from things like the Housing Advocate, who's actually written a series of the reports. The Housing Council for the government has highlighted some of these problems and solutions to addressing the housing crisis, and as well as the Parliamentary Budget Officer, who's actually found the shortcomings and where the problems are, and so those reports are all on the public record, and I'd be happy to send some links through to Tanya for her to share with everyone.
Jenny, you gave us some really, really great information tonight, some really good ideas. Mikayla, you shared with us your personal stories. I look forward to working with you again on the issue. Len, thank you for telling us, the inside story from the local not-for-profit. And let's all give our speakers a little jazz hands. Thank you. Wonderful. Okay, everybody. I look forward to connecting with you in the future, and take care. If you have any other topics you'd like us to speak about, please reach out to us. Kathy Sproul has put that into our chat here. So thank you very much, everyone. Have a wonderful night.